Hi, Rach. I'm Grace, and this is my creative partner, Jess.
Hi.
We've got a question for you.
So a lot has been said about the need for diversity in advertising, both in the industry and the actual work. But what we want to know is, what are we actually doing?
Yeah, how are we making it a more formal part of the creative process so that agencies and clients not only include, but amplify diverse voices?
Welcome to Rethink, a podcast by Think with Google. I'm Rachel Corbett, and the idea of creating more diverse and inclusive workplaces is something people have been fighting for years, but it is still taking time for companies to turn their understanding of its importance into real, meaningful change, which seems pretty silly, since getting it right can not only lead to a better culture and better creative, but, and here's the real kicker, a better bottom line. Why? Because if the people inside the four walls of your office are reflective of the people outside it, that diversity of perspective will help you create content that truly speaks to people, no matter where they're from. Something Tara McKenty, a creative director from Google, knows well.
Diversity of perspective leads to better insights, better outcomes, and simply better work. And when you've got a diverse set of people writing the ads and creating the advertising for our large, diverse set of audiences, the chances are it's more likely that that creative is going to be relative, it's going to reflect our audience bases, and it's going to make audiences and users feel affinity towards the products we're selling, the services we're selling, and the brands that we're trying to create.
And who wouldn't want that? Tara is not only a creative, she's also the co-founder of Rare, a platform that helps drive diversity and inclusion in tech, media and creative industries. No small task. So how do they do it?
So we do that through providing MBA-level education, a network to other diverse creatives, and basically giving the tools, network and skills they need to shortcut their success and thrive and survive in the industry, and particularly around retention, because we have a lot of great diverse talent that has entered the industry, has been in the industry for a few years, and then we've seen them dropping out because our industry isn't inclusive. And the reason why it's important for the program to exist and programs like it to exist is fundamentally because without diversity and inclusion, there wouldn't be imagination, and without imagination, there wouldn't be innovation. And advertising and technology companies are in the industry for both.
Absolutely. And diverse opinions, experiences and perspectives mean diverse ideas. And when ideas are your business, that's got to be a good thing. But what does diversity actually mean? Tara thinks there's more nuance in the term than we realise.
The word diversity is often referred to as one-dimensional or inherent diversity. And we kind of stop there and then leave it alone and don't dig too deep. For me, the definition of diversity is two-dimensional. The first dimension is inherent diversity, so it's traits of diversity that you're born with. So I describe myself as intersectional, I am LGBTQI, and I'm a female working in a male-dominated industry. So those would be two of my inherent diversity traits. So gender and sexuality. Other inherent diversity examples might be your ethnicity. It might be what class you're born into, so all things you can't control. The second dimension of diversity is acquired diversity. So this is all of the things that happen to you along your life that change your perspective of the world. So one example of acquired diversity that can also be inherent is people that live with disability, for example. Some people are born with a disability and other people acquire it. So that's probably one that sits in between. That shifts your perspective of the world. It gives you different experiences to draw from. And that is a really interesting example of acquired diversity that can influence the way you think.
And that diversity is the thing that gives you insight into experiences that are different to yours. And that's a powerful thing to have access to when you're in the business of communication, especially when there are consequences to getting it wrong.
I think now more than ever, brands are being held accountable by consumers. When something feels tokenistic, we're able to communicate these feelings back to brands. What we're seeing in Australia is that consumers are educating themselves about these topics as well. And we've seen that in trend results. For example, the search for Black Lives Matter hit an all-time high in Australia in June, as to be expected. But what was interesting over the weeks and months since, interest has remained to elevate. So actually in July, search interest was 28 times higher than usual monthly volumes, which means this isn't a movement that was here and it's gone. people are still interested and they're still going to continue to push and educate themselves on this issue so they can continue to speak about it.
And that's being proven in the search results.
What Aboriginal land am I on? That search increase is up by 270 times in the past 90 days. So Australians are really starting to care. They're really starting to be aware of other cultures around them, and they're starting to lean into these issues. And I think as brands creating advertising to reflect Australia and Australians, we're not going to get away with the laziness and comms and excluding certain communities like we have done in the past.
And nor should we. Diversity isn't about change for change's sake. It's about the power that can come from being around people who have a wide range of experiences. But once you get them in the door, you have to work hard at keeping them.
You can find great talent, you can give them the position, but unless they are listened to or they feel psychologically safe in the environment that you put them in, there's no point, because you've done a lot of work to find, recruit and hire. When it comes to getting the best out of that different mind or getting the best out of difference in perspective, you can't just have them there. They can't be tokenistic. You need your entire team to be inclusive and behave inclusively. Otherwise, you won't get the best out of that person's mind.
And what's the point in that? So how do we make sure that people feel safe so their ideas can be heard? For Tara, it's all about who's steering the ship.
I think it comes down to the makeup in your leadership team. So to get psychological safety, it's proven that teams that have a mixture of inherent diverse leaders and acquired diverse leaders create the safest environment for inclusion, and they get better performance out of their teams, and their teams are able to problem solve more efficiently.
So if this is something you're looking at implementing in your organisation, Tara has some tips for how to go about it.
As an agency or a business, you can either self-learn and become a more inclusive leader yourself, and there's lots of different programs, or if you really want to invest in DEI, then I would look at bringing in a culture change consultant to help you. It is a journey. Everyone's in a different place, and taking one small step forward is better than taking none.
Amen. So if you're thinking diversity, inclusion, are they the same thing? Are they different? Where's my dictionary? To dive deep on the idea of inclusion, let's bring in creative consultant Karen Ferry, who's got a nice way of explaining it.
So there's this quote by diversity advocate Verna Myers, which is something like, diversity is inviting people to a party, inclusion is asking them to dance.
And who doesn't want to be asked to dance? I do if anyone's interested, but back to the point. Being inclusive allows for people from all backgrounds to rise through the ranks and gain experience in a way that hasn't traditionally been possible.
The way our systems work is that they favour people who are white or male or middle class, and they disfavour, through that, anyone who's not. And that doesn't mean that anyone who is favoured is a bad person. It just means that our systems don't allow for people who are diverse minorities to excel in the same way that anyone else could.
And when people are able to excel, they get a chance to take a seat at the table. And you want people who are reflective of all walks of life to be at the table when you're coming up with ideas. Why? So you don't stuff it up.
We leave coded messages through all our stuff. And a lot of that can sometimes come off as exclusionary. Like, say you've got an ad and it's full of white Australians living in Federation houses and they've all got giant yards. And while that might seem aspirational to some people, there's a lot of people who would look at that and be like, I can't see myself in that picture. That picture is made by society who only prizes this certain type of lifestyle. And it's like, and you might come from a background where none of those things are what you want. You might come from a part of Australia where that picture is so remote. It's like, that doesn't look like Australia to so much of Australia. And this idea that that's somehow aspirational to people who don't live like that and have chosen not to live like that. And what it can do at its worst is then make people think this brand isn't for me because they don't understand me. But more importantly, they don't want to understand me. They don't want me to like them. And it makes them feel lonely, and it makes them, more importantly, associate a negative connotation with your brand. And that's really hard to undo.
Is the importance of this sinking in yet? Diversity and inclusion isn't about ticking a box. It's about making your brand messages more powerful and preventing the people watching the stuff that you've paid a lot of money for thinking, I don't like these people. I don't think they like me. But it's not just the images that we can get wrong. It's also the words.
The way that we work as a society is we're kind of like a hive of bees in that we all communicate with each other. And because it's so hard to explain everything from the beginning, we communicate in a lot of shorthand. You have to live in Australia to understand that mate has two different meanings depending on the tone that you apply it to. But then if you speak to a person from another country, they don't understand that because they haven't lived the experience. That is a shorthand. That's a cultural shorthand, and everything we do is full of it. And I don't think we respect that when we live in a really multicultural country, a lot of people don't understand those shorthands. And we code our ads with so much of it that it is exclusionary to the people who don't understand it. But more importantly, when you then pick people who only speak that shorthand to then try and mimic the shorthand of another demographic, it doesn't come out the same. It's tokenistic. And when you create diversity, when you create inclusion and when you create equity, you then get the kind of work that is lived and tells those stories.
But change doesn't happen overnight, and if you're going to hire more diverse talent, there needs to be a way for them to come in the door. And that's what Karen tried to do when she was National Head of Award School. Award is an Australian program open to everyone that gives students a way to get real-world experience working on briefs. To get into the course, you have to submit a portfolio, and 10 years ago, Chairman Mark Harricks decided to do a little experiment.
So up to that point, when senior creatives would be in a room, they would look at these books and they would see every student's name and then they would talk about which student's book was better. And often the top 10 were 90% male, if not all male. As soon as he introduced blind judging, it became 50-50, female-male. And it was just that one change of removing names, remove that bias. So I wanted to make sure that we started to bring in the learnings that we understand more about diversity in the past few years into the course. So we were much more selective in picking judges that were more accommodating to different unexpected ways of thinking. And what happened was last year, doing that and making sure we had that at application but also at judging, we also introduced a system where we used to allow judges to talk about the best work and then decide. We realised that that created a room where judges who had a stronger opinion and were more, I guess, intense in their personalities would win the conversation as opposed to having an even amount. So we changed it to a number-based judging system, which is how awards shows like Cannes work. The books and the top 10 students had changed from what was opinion-based versus what was point-based. So for 25 years, it was always men who were the top of Sydney. For the first time in about 25 years, we had a state winner that was female. But also, for the first time in 25 years, it was a female national winner. It shows that there's no gender preference between creative thinking.
Who would have thunk it, eh? Us ladies don't have bad ideas from time to time. So, if you're still hiding under the covers, scared of change, Karen's got some advice for you.
Change doesn't have to be bad if it's forced upon you. Change can be exciting if you bring it and invite it in. And it's not just about the change of who you're working with, but the change of how things could be different, but how things could be better. You know, I think after COVID, hopefully a lot of people are reflecting about how they want to live better and the things that are actually important to us. And I think a lot of that is people.
Do you know what the best thing is about diversity? Everything. So let's stop talking about it and get together over the meat that doesn't discriminate. Right. Lamb's ready. So, who was here first?
That'd be us.
Right, you are.
Remember that? That's the Meat and Livestock Australia Company's 2017 spring ad. And Barb Humphries is a creative director at The Monkeys who's been working closely with MLA for years. And together they were determined to make their ads look more like Australia.
We set about casting the most diverse cast that we could. We got everyone together, we filmed it in one take, and we'd sort of ended with Arkadas, the presenter, saying to Greg Inglis and Kathy Freeman, you know, or he's talking to the crowd, who was here first? And they say, that'd be us.
Touché. But you can't send a message like that and then drop your usual ad on January 26 without touching on the fact that for some Australians, it's a really painful day. So instead of sticking with the traditional message, they decided to create an ad that was more inclusive.
Hey guys, what's the occasion?
Do we need one? Look, it's the boat people.
Hang on. Aren't we all boat people?
And you're welcome.
What is love?
And so they wrote this script, which was about the fact that Aboriginal Australians had been here the longest and everybody else was essentially boat people. So it was the biggest party imaginable, but, you know, not without its complications, because I think in telling that story, The team were really mindful of telling it in a way that was respectful. Obviously, there's a bit of humour there, but there needs to be an incredible sensitivity to the subject. They work with Reconciliation Australia and various consultants on the concept. And then when they came to sort of working through the script, there were so many versions of those lines and dialogue to make sure it felt balanced and landed in the right way. But once they had the cast, they workshopped the dialogue with the cast and made sure that everybody felt comfortable saying the lines that they were saying in that situation.
You mentioned Reconciliation Australia and then working with some of the actors around their comfort level with the lines. Do you think that's an essential part of the process, is getting that buy-in from people who really have an intimate understanding of the situation and what you're trying to communicate?
As creatives, you're supposed to be able to sort of just start writing from someone else's perspective. You know, we're meant to have imaginations and be able to do that, but there are certain subjects and occasions where it's just not right to make it up in your own head, and writing about certain issues that you maybe don't have the best understanding of, but it is so important if you are speaking to an issue that you don't have first-person experience in, and the best intentions can land in the worst way. You don't get to, unfortunately, stand next to your ad going, oh, well, what we tried to do was this. You know, in the end, people judge the bit of content that's on their screen. So, you know, that process in the pre-production and the lead-up and the edit and things like that are really important.
What do you think are the benefits of creating diverse content?
I think our audiences deserve it, and I think presenting a very single-minded or narrow view of the world not only limits us in terms of, you know, you're not hearing diverse stories and we're cutting off the opportunity to hear interesting stories and perspectives, but equally it means that we don't have the opportunity to hear from people who think differently to us or to present a view of the world that doesn't reflect our immediate worldview. And there's a real opportunity there to learn and to change points of view on things.
So instead of thinking of change as something scary, think of it as progress. And if you're the person in charge of the numbers, think of it as exactly what it is: smart business. As we've just heard, diversity is just reality. And if you've spent your entire life in a single experience, no matter who you are or where you're from, there's so much to be learned by peeking into other people's experiences and understanding what life is like for them. And when you add to that the power that this can bring to creative decision making, then all of a sudden, actively pursuing a more diverse workplace doesn't feel like a giant mountain to climb. It feels like the smartest decision that you have ever made. Reflect the people outside your business inside it, and you'll be more likely to create campaigns and messages that resonate. And don't leave anyone thinking, this isn't for me. Nobody likes to be on the wrong side of history, so if you are not moving on this, get your skates on, because there's nothing I like less than having to knock on someone's door and say, I told you so. Oh, and I'll do it. You've been listening to Rethink, a podcast by Think with Google. I've been your host, Rachel Corbett, and this podcast has been Wall to Wall Lady. Represent! If you're enjoying this show, there is only one more ep until the season is wrapped up, so please share it with everyone and let's bring this baby home with lots of ears attached to it. This podcast was brought to you by Think with Google. It was created by The Hallway and Eardrum in partnership with Google and produced by Eardrum. The executive producer was Ralph Van Dyke. The producer was Sarah Mashman. Project manager was Jesse Williams. The theme was Rethought by Tucker Perry. The engineer was Adrian Walton. And it seems like the perfect time for me to say that this podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.